Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I'm Steve Doyle and I'm your host. Well, I'm very, very excited about our guest today. You all out there in the viewing audience, very often when you share your kind comments, which you do, it's not unusual to get suggestions. Hey, Steve, you should think about speaking to this person, or have you ever thought about talking to so-and-so about something? And almost on every list that gets sent to me is our guest today. I'm very pleased that Evelyn Herzog is joining us today. I've been after Evie a long time to be on the show. And I know there's a lot to talk about, so we're just going to get right to it. Hello and welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm well, and I'm happy to see you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to see you too. As you know, I've been wanting to have you on the show for quite a while now. So I'm very pleased that this day has finally come. So, Evelyn, we start this show the way I'm going to start the show the way we do with everybody. Where are you coming to us today from?
Baltimore, Maryland, the Federal Hill neighborhood. And I am not a native Baltimorean, but my husband, John, is. And his work with Amtrak and other railroad-related things took him up and down the Eastern Seaboard and even to Britain for a while. And whereas I originally come from New Haven, Connecticut, and went for grad school to New York City. And once I got to New York City, I was there for 35 years. And only true love could have gotten me out of Manhattan. But so it had to be.
Well, there goes.
And Baltimore turned out to be fine. There are a lot of things that I'm particularly fond of in Baltimore. And so it's been good. And we still get up to New York on a reasonable basis.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that Baltimore, Bethesda, that whole corridor there's everything's so close together. Out here in the Midwest, we're further apart. So everything just seems not that far away when you're there. So easy to get around.
Yes.
So the other sort of standard question that I like to ask, I we'll talk about your Sherlockian history here, of course, but we're going to fall back before most people like to start your story. When did you find Sherlock Holmes? I know it had to be before college.
Yes, when I was a kid, though it's hard to say exactly when. The Rathbone Bruce movies were certainly around, and I don't know how little I was when they appeared. And the British Italian TV serial with Ronald Howard was on fairly early. I think we got it in the States not long after it was produced for British TV. And that was an okay early Holmes encounter. They were both youngish men. Holmes was annoying, and Watson let he had a beautiful slow burn, so that what it's like to really be Watson.
Indeed, I'm sure that was.
There was a lot of intentional humor in the series, and so that was.
So that was sort of an early exposure to Sherlock Holmes that you had.
That's right. And I'm not sure when I started reading the stories, but eventually I managed to acquire the complete, and that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. That was my first real book of my own, not counting, children's books that were presented to me.
Right. Yes, I know how that goes. That's so interesting. And so this was well before college, because we will talk about your college experiences with Sherlock Holmes.
You bet.
But this was before college. Was it like high school or eighth grade or something?
Yes. In my teens, I guess I will say, because I know by seventh or eighth grade I had the full canon, and it was cool.
You know, I guess we're going to just kind of dive into to the big story that everybody kind of knows about. One of the things I like to talk to people about is when they entered the Sherlockian community. I think our community is very unique and has it's complex and it's unique, and so that's an interest of mine, is to hear how people come in and how they found it and what that was like for them. Yours is probably the most unique experience in this department that I know of. And so how did you first become aware? So here, we'll just set the stage. You're in college, right?
No, I'm in high school.
In high school. So when did you become aware of that there was a Sherlockian community?
I visited the main New Haven Public Library and found William S. Baring Gould's Sherlock Holmes, a biography, and took it out. And in Watson's own words, I think I could show you the very paving stone where I was standing when I opened up to the appendices in the back and discovered that there was a world of Sherlock Holmes fans, that there were organizations and there were publications. I couldn't believe my eyes. So that was a phenomenal discovery and
a galvanizing moment. Or you just like,
that's right. And soon, I mean, I poured over it, but soon it was clear the first and easiest thing to do was to get a subscription to the Baker Street Journal, which I had to hit my father up for a check. It was before, I was a high school kid. I didn't have checks, and I don't think I would have gone with sending money through the mail. But anyway, and so that started coming in 1964 or 65. So that probably is a junior in high school, and that was wonderful. And of course, it had all the great lit crit, but then it had the information on various groups. And in those days, the people who wrote for it, I think that their home addresses were listed in the whodunit.
Oh yes, they were.
Page. Yes, and we don't live that way now. But
no.
although then now email finds us everyone, so the pendulum goes back and forth. So it was wonderful having that, so that when, I guess now we can jump ahead to college, when in 1965 I went to Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, where I lived, but far enough across town that I lived there, that I roomed at school rather than being a day hop, because for one thing, I couldn't drive, and for another thing, we didn't have two cars. We were just a little family.
Right.
So, and that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I'm an only child, and which I'm very happy being one, but there were certain social graces I did not have, such as how to live with other people of my own age. So I got to make friends, and it was wonderful.
So what was Alberta Magnus like in those days, at least when you were there? I mean, how big was it, and what was that community like?
Oh, that's a fair question. It had been founded in the 1920s by Dominican sisters, and they had originally managed to get a mansion that had belonged to a very well-to-do family in a nice section of New Haven. not all the native locals, their neighbors, were thrilled to have a college and Catholics to boot, but so it had to be. They were there. And gradually they acquired other big houses in the neighborhood. And by the time I got there, they had also built a nice brick building that was a dorm, and particularly for freshmen. So we all landed in together in a modern building. They could keep an eye on us. And it also allowed us to make friends. There were students from all 4 years there, but it included all the freshmen.
And Alberta Magnus was a women's college, right?
Oh yes. And I might as well take this opportunity to quote John Bennett Shaw's remarkable statement that his understanding was that if a girl wasn't a virgin when she matriculated at Albertus Magnus, she was by the time she graduated. So it was very Catholic, and there were many rules, and there was lights out at 10:45, I believe, and if you put in a chit, you could have 15 extra minutes of study time to 11 o'clock, and then absolutely lights out. And and you had to sign out, and there were dorm mothers at each of the buildings. Mm-hmm. After the first year, then we got to live in some of these fine houses, and that was a treat. Circular staircases and all that stuff.
Wow, that does sound bad. That sounds good.
Yes, and the food was okay, and partially staffed by the sisters, but also partially staffed. At that time, the Culinary Institute was halfway between us and Yale, and so they had work-study people who came and helped out, poor souls.
Oh my goodness. Well, that had to be pretty good. Usually,
I do not remember.
College food's pretty notoriously awful. Unless you have Culinary Institute students working there.
Yeah, so it was at least adequate.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Now, so this was like you said 1965.
That's right.
Yeah, it was quite a time too, wasn't it? I mean, it was socially and culturally, there was a lot going on then.
That's right. And some of the people who were bigger souled than me and also knew what they were doing worked in the community, and because we had a high-tone neighborhood on one side of us and a much poorer neighborhood on the other side of us. And so we had people who organized to help the poorer kids get reading help and preparations to hit the world running. And so I look back at them and think, Evie, you missed a bet. But the fact of the matter is, I was a giddy girl.
Well, we're kind of coming up to that moment where,
I will say we did have a moment of social preparation for the adventurous craziness. A couple of years in, the school student government got into trouble with the people who ran the school, and the student government was taken out of office and suspended for a meeting that involved them passing legislation that the school decided was really a bad idea, and not only ought they not to have done it, but that they themselves should be reprimanded, including one or two members of the student council that weren't there that day. No,
they didn't do it.
They didn't do it, but they got punished all. So we struck. And that was about as scared as I had ever been up till then, because we didn't know whether we would win. We didn't know whether we would all be suspended or expelled. And there was a good chance that our parents would kill us.
Yeah. Oh. What happened?
We won. The school, the nuns reconsidered and found a different way to put it, and so there was a different answer to the misstep by the student body, by the student representatives. So they were not suspended after all, and something was rejiggered. But anyway, I'm sure they didn't try it again. The thing they passed, I think it had to do with parietals, times when men might be on the premises.
Right. Well, let me ask you, I mean, thinking about the age that you had to be at this time, you were, and you do something like this, and it's scary, yet you pull it off, you and your friends, and that had to be a moment where you sort of felt empowered and like, wow, we can do things. This is really, and if that's so, did that carry into sort of the way, into that story, the famous story that we're going to talk about here shortly?
It had to have done. Yes, it had to have done. And although we still were somewhat terrified about that as well. So should I explain how we became acquainted with our first Sherlockian?
Yeah, let's sort of set the stage. So here you are, you're in college, and you found other students, other friends who were into Sherlock Holmes too, I take it, and
who were at least familiar with Holmes and who were ripe for having chats about them. Mm-hmm. Everybody had their own favorite reading and musical and television things. So we did a lot of joint reading of the C.S. Lewis's Narnia trilogy, and Star Trek started that year, and many of us were devoted Star Trek fans, and various other popular culture things to share. But of course, I was the one who came to school with the canon under my arm and the Baker Street Journal arriving, and so naturally, I had the best one. So while we followed up on everything, and the Wild Wild West and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, there were a lot of strange things, but naturally, the Sherlock Holmes world, as I understood it, already had the whole framework for enjoying it as semi-real literature. You could write silly things and you could write serious things, and there was room for it all. And because of my mentioning that there are addresses at the BSJ, we realized we could probably just write to people. I'd gotten a copy of my own now of the Baring Gould Sherlock Holmes biography, and Pat Moran, one of our original members, was reading up on his chronology and found that he had given, I think, a 13-month gestation period for her giving birth to Holmes's son, Nero Wolfe. And she thought that was odd. And we decided we would take umbrage at it. So we wrote a letter to Mr. Baring Gould, actually not directly to him, care of his publishers, but it did get to him. And we were rude but funny. We addressed it, "Dear Sir, you cur," and said he was affronting all womanhood with this, and what about it? And he wrote, and by the grace of God, he thought it was funny. And he wrote back and said, "Dear ladies, you seem to have caught me with my dates down."
He took it in the spirit it was intended.
That's right. That's right. Everything else might have come to a halt in our Sherlockian lives if he had really been stood on ceremony. But
isn't it something that a lot of people have moments like that, like a moment, sort of an inflection point where if it had gone the other way, everything would be different.
That's right. We would now be famous Trekkies now, perhaps.
Well, that's all right too.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So you wrote. So he wrote you back, and that must have lit a fuse or something. It had to be.
Oh, yes. So we wrote group letters to him. 5 or 6 of us putting in paragraphs or deciding what we'd say, and then he would write back, and he would send us printed matter, ephemera, and then we thought we should try and get hold of more people. And how would we do this? And again, from having the Baker Street Journal, Dr. Wolf always listed everything that had come in of a Sherlockian publication. And so we thought, well, we will get something into our school magazine, and which I don't think we ever edited it, but they would take anything from anyone. I mean, the poor souls, they had to fill up X number of pages several times a year. So we got 1 or 2 Sherlockian things in them, the Albertinum, and then we sent a copy to Dr. Wolf, and he duly listed it. And we thought we would be besieged. Well, no, but we did hear from a few people, of which one was Peter Blau and one was John Bennett Shaw. So now we knew everybody, because through them, they opened the whole world.
Right.
But
what a start. I mean, you're corresponding with William S. Baring Gould. Now you've connected with Peter Blau and John Bennett Shaw. And wow, I mean, you started high.
That's right. And a couple of other people that I will only get it wrong trying to say who. I'll mess up the names. But and then they introduced us to other people. And of course, Peter Blau is very generous with stuff. And John Shaw the same. So we would see things that other people had written, and so go thou and do likewise was more or less their message.
Right. Yes. Yeah. What good role models, really.
Yes. Oh, and now taking a step back to when I first saw the Baring Gould book and subscribed to the journal, I also wrote a letter to Dr. Wolf, as many have done before and since, to say, I understand you've got this great group. What does a person have to do to join this group? And got a little form letter back. It was a nicely pre-printed thing, and that it was a private organization, and so one doesn't join, one is asked to join, and but keep enjoying the canon and words to that effect.
But there was no mention in the response that it was mail
letter. I don't think the form letter said that.
Yeah, I've seen that form letter. Yeah.
Yes,
but it's curious that's the letter you got. That.
And then
of the fact that it was at the time men only.
And then after a while, I finally managed to get my aunt to let me use her mailing address, and I wrote in a man's name, in my grandfather's name. He was long gone, asking the same question. I got the same answer.
Oh, no.
So that was good to know.
Yes, that is good to know.
And of course, reading the Scion reports in the BSJ. So everything came from the BSJ, all the different.
Everything comes from the BSJ, everybody.
Told me everything I needed to know. And so I could see that by and large, most of the groups were only guys' names, though of course there were co-ed groups at that time. Now see, I'm gonna say the wrong ones. Well, certainly San Francisco, but others. Right. But we were penniless college kids in New Haven, so we weren't going any of those places. So we were glad they were there, but it had nothing to do with us.
Right. I mean, that must have seemed like it was an impossibly, like in the land of Oz or something. Thinking
that's right. So something that might be mattered. Yes.
Yeah.
And we thought, why would the Baker Street Irregulars not want to have women? Because because there must be other people like us, only older, who ought to be members of that by now. But there had to be, and why weren't there? And it was the 60s, and we said maybe they just don't understand. And we could have written them a letter, Dr. Wolf, but it must have occurred to them all these years, because we came to understand that the organization was a good 30 years old. And
I'm sure it wasn't the first time somebody inquired about it, nor the last, of course.
Yes. So instead of setting up a letter writing campaign, we decided we would picket them. Okay,
so Evelyn, we're up to that moment, but we're going to take a break, and we're going to hear from our commercial sponsor.
Hi, my name is Bob Katz. I'm a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, and I'm the co-publisher of BSI Press, but more importantly, I'm a subscriber to the Baker Street Journal since 1973.
Hello, my name is Ralph Hall from Louisville, Kentucky. I am a member of the Baker Street Irregulars. I have subscribed to this journal I'm holding here before me, the Baker Street Journal, for 40 plus years.
Hi, I'm Monica Schmitz, and you should subscribe to the Baker Street Journal.
Hi, I'm Scott Monty from I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the website and podcast about the connection between Sherlock Holmes and popular culture. You know, the Baker Street Journal has been a wonderful sponsor of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere and Trifles, our companion podcast, for many years. And when you think about the connection between Sherlock Holmes and popular culture, the Baker Street Journal has always been there.
I have literally read every issue of the Baker Street Journal since the old series in 1946.
It's full of Sherlockian scholarship and humor. The artwork on the cover is wonderful.
People take their interest from today and imbue it into the Baker Street Journal in every single issue. And if you're not subscribing, you're missing out on some of the most fascinating and lively scholarship in the Sherlockian world today.
And basically, if you don't read the Baker Street Journal, I don't know why you're being a Sherlockian.
This is where it's at.
Okay, we're back. Well, we're right up to that moment that, there are things you can look back on things and you think, I've looked back on your story. I've spoken to many people in this show now, and I look back on kind of these events that they've had in their lives, and you think, man, sometimes you didn't understand that this was a moment or a thing that's happening that's going to change the direction of everything. Other times you kind of do. When you and your friends decided to picket the BSI dinner in New York City, did you understand what you were doing, really? I mean, I knew you knew what you were doing, but did you have an idea what this was going to be?
No, we were idiots. But it meant a lot to us. And it was the 60s. It seemed as though it ought to be done. So we should do it. We had no idea what would come of it naturally, whether they would say, oh, of course, or whether they would call the cops on us, or whether, as actually happened, they pretty much ignored us. But once we had the idea, it would have been cowardly not to do it. Now, I will say I had so many misgivings. I was nominally their leader because I was the one that came with the book under my arm. But it seemed as though we had to. Our friend John.
How many were there?
There were 6 picketers. I would say the Sherlock Holmes group was about a dozen regulars. It varied a bit because someone would come along and give it a try and then no.
Right.
But about a dozen, and it was 6 of us, and that same Pat Moran was on crutches because she had an infection in one ankle, but
that's devotion to a cause.
That's right.
Picketing on crutches.
That's right. Our friend John Bennett Shaw, everyone's friend John Bennett Shaw, had gotten us an invitation to the Gillette luncheon on that Friday. So 6 of us then had sent in our money and signed up and attended that. So that gave us the excuse to be down in New York and take a hotel for overnight. And so that was when we met in person. We were at the first event that had Sherlockians other than us. We had met Bill Baring Gould in the meantime separately, but and then he passed away, which just had us on the floor. So but I guess I won't go into that.
Right. I remember when Peter was on the show, Peter Blau, he talked about this, and he talked in other places, and he talks about how you sent a letter up, I think, didn't you?
To Bill Baring Gould?
Yeah, you sent a letter up to the dinner while you were picketing.
Oh, okay. Yes, at the picket. Well, we were out there back and forth picketing, and then we realized eventually we'd have to stop, but we didn't have a plan. But while we were dithering, and of course we didn't know which people coming in were Sherlockians or just regular patrons of that nice restaurant. But someone let Dr. Wolf know that this was going on outside, and it didn't make him happy. And he knew that John Shaw corresponded with us. Presumably Shaw had let it slip. And also that Peter Blau much more recently had started corresponding with us. And so he said to the two of them, go down there and do something about those girls. And they brilliantly invited us into the downstairs bar. So that got us out of the cold, and then they offered to take up a message if we wanted to give one, and that hadn't occurred to us at all. So we quickly scrawled a manifesto, I think on a cocktail napkin, but maybe on a brown paper bag. I do have various souvenirs, but it's not clear to me how we did it. But I do have the language somewhere, but we implored them. It was not for ourselves that we asked, oh no, but there would certainly be other women Sherlockians that they should consider admitting. And so the fellas bought us each a drink.
Story so much.
And then they went back upstairs, and it was great for us because we weren't marching around anymore. Freezing.
So what'd you do? Did you go, okay, well, I guess that's that. I mean, did you?
I guess so. We needed dinner too. So probably the Horn and Hardart or whatever was in the vicinity of the New Yorker Hotel right there near Penn Station. So all the details afterwards are kind of lost to memory.
Yeah.
And of course,
so clearly I just have this, it's a charming, I don't mean that in any kind of patronizing way. It's charming because you're just college students. Like you said, you didn't have a plan. You just wanted to do this thing. You thought it was the right thing to do. And
we knew we wouldn't get any. It was extremely unlikely they would rush downstairs and say, oh, come up and join us. So we were not disappointed. Mm-hmm. And a couple of newspaper reporters talked to us, so that was fun.
And then, but even though it was sort of a kind of a poorly planned little escapade that happened,
we had made our case.
You'd made your case, but it kind of started something. Really, it did, and
it only took 21 years.
Well, what's the adventurous's motto?
That's right. The Gouda.
A drop carves the rock, not by force, but by persistence. Isn't that how it goes?
Yes. Thank you. That's better translation than I could have managed at the moment.
Well, but it's true, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So then really my face appearing at a, or any of us kind of was, what are you doing about it, without our having to say anything to guys more of the masculine persuasion. What are you doing about it? We're still here.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention a cop also came. God, we were scared to death. But he just wanted to make sure we were not blocking patrons from entering the restaurant. And we said, absolutely not. And actually, I said, if you want us to leave, we'll leave. But he didn't need us to.
So interesting. The, like you said, okay, so at what point did the idea of the adventuresses, okay, now you said we got to do something, like we've done this. We push that first domino. What happens now? So
actually, no, we went back to our secluded life, our secluded convent life. Well, we wrote occasional articles. Linda Patterson got published in the journal. She wrote a narrative of an old Holmes, and Dr. Wolf liked it well enough to publish it. And here I gotta thank the high-mindedness of Julian Wolfe. He could have made a list of names never to go into the journal ever, but he didn't do that. He was a fine gent, and as years went by, I developed more and more sympathy for him, the poor guy.
A lot of people, I mean, I've read some things lately, some sort of more recent criticism of Dr. Wolfe about his sort of insistence on maintaining the all-male tradition of the Irregulars. And most of these opinions are expressed by people who weren't there and didn't understand the world.
Because he was carrying the whole group on his shoulders, and the journal with the two typewriters, the one in 10 point and the one in 12 point. He
Right.
was getting it out, and so overworked and underpaid. And then people want to change things. He just wouldn't have had the bandwidth.
Right, exactly. And I think there's an ungenerousness recently about him, and that by people who should know better, frankly. But so I'm pleased to hear that, because I've always thought, it's easy until you're sitting in that chair, you probably can't imagine what that's like.
Yes, I haven't reacted all that well over the years when people had ideas of fixing things, and we'll make it better. We'll do it this way. No.
Well, we're all just human, right? And do the best we can. So, but you mentioned, 26, 28 years. I don't know how long it was exactly. What's the math between this and? So when did the Adventuresses as an organization get going?
I don't really know. Eventually I could figure out when we took that name. We would sign our letters with various witty names for the group, because if we just signed all our last names, it was like a frightening law firm. So one time it was the vinyl problem because of the fancy stickers we got for the rainy weather, and the shrieking violets, one of the fellas suggested, and we liked that. And my unsubstantiated memory is that somehow Dr. Wolfe himself produced the phrase "the adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes."
Really?
That doesn't make any sense, but that's the folk way that's in my brain. So I haven't found any proof of it, but I haven't found any other thing where a person made that suggestion.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting. That's an interesting.
Of course, it was an age before everything was recorded, and
indeed, yeah, you could just do something without having to make a epic out of it. So certainly it was going in by the 1980s, because
Oh yes. Oh well. We it petered out, and then it had a rebirth in the mid 1970s when the girls who were in my year and I graduated in 1969. We left behind some of Sherlockians at Alberta's, but not enough to keep it going. Now, one of them, Mary Ellen Cushon, now Mary Ellen Rich, then caught up with us in New York and was one of the main people who gave us good ideas for doing things in after years. But for a couple of years after graduation, the group was kind of non-existent. Individually, some of us came to the birthday weekend, which was much tinier than it is now.
Oh, yes, sure
in numbers of people and certainly in events, but it was still, there were people to hang out with, so that was still a pleasure. But we were an expired group until, you'd think I'd know, I guess 1975. Several of us Alberta's girls, and well, the Algonquin lobby in the afternoon, on the Friday afternoon, late afternoon, was full of people and largely Sherlockians. And then all of a sudden, all the men stood up and made for the door because it was time. The BSI dinner was starting. And so it was like a whirlwind had passed through the lobby, leaving a few scattered remnants clinging to the tables for dear life. And who were pretty much all women. Now, a few had already plans. They were used to this and had places to go, the theater or dinner. But there were half a dozen of us, I guess three of the Alberta's girls and three others, Kate Carlson, Angie Mitchell, and Nancy Andrus. Gee, I hope I've got it right. Plus me and Pat and Linda and Mary Ellen. So that's 7 people in all. And we looked at one another and introduced one another to another and said, here we are, let's go to dinner. And it happened that Mary Ellen lived nearby, and there was a restaurant on the ground floor of her building. She lived above a restaurant. So La Ray's, a lovely French restaurant, who nonetheless would take us. So we ate there, and then we went up to Mary Ellen's for afterwards. And we signed her a copy of the canon, and the Adventuresses came back to life.
That's great. Oh, I love that. So, because I discovered Sherlock Holmes in 1974. In high school, like freshman in high school, and then went to college. Later, and then, like you said, things kind of, that's a time of life where you've got other things going on. Your attention gets unfocused. But once I was kind of through college, and I re-entered the Sherlockian world, and that's when I learned about the Adventuresses. I started really learning about the larger world, only learning about it, not really experiencing it yet. But so I knew it had to be going by like 1981. So
that's right. Yeah. And I ought to mention one of the linchpins. I didn't understand it at the time, but Kate Carlson, who was one of the people that met up with us, was one of the former young Sherlockians. She had been a Sherlock Holmes fan for quite a while and was affiliated with other Sherlock Holmes fans in, I think, high school and then college through a number of groups that I didn't know about until it was too late to join them. They were young people's things. And since I only learned about Sherlockian groups in late high school, I wanted to be focusing on grown-ups groups. Right. If it had happened a couple of years earlier for me, I would have been way keen on any of these. And they were mostly, I guess, corresponding societies, but they were full of activities. So they were great. So she was a no kidding real Sherlockian in her own right. And if she had stood on ceremony and thought, I don't know that I really want to associate myself with these women, everything would have been different. But she just had an open heart, and came in the end, and Angie and Nancy likewise. I'd forgotten what their previous experience had been, but they were real enthusiasts, no two ways, and that made everything possible.
I love that. I love that. The that's a big part of the beauty, I think, of our community, is that so many there is an open heartedness, to use your term, there is, and a generosity and a welcoming spirit, I think, that shows up time and again when you're talking to somebody about their experience in this hobby. Well, time is getting on, but so there's a few things I do want to get to. So, I know that it was 1991. I know you've had experience in the Sherlockian world that isn't just devoted to the fact that about women joining the BSI. I know you've got a much broader.
Oh yes, nominally ASH is the Women's Special Interest Group, but actually we'll write about anyone and
right.
Yeah, you can't confine yourself to just one topic.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I just kind of want to just get a little past it, but I'd be remiss if I did not talk about 1991 and what happened there, and what it must have meant to you when it happened.
Yes, as the years went by, we didn't really seem to be making too much headway in women becoming BSI, but from the 70s on, there was such an increase in enthusiasm for Sherlock Holmes as popular culture. Nicholas Meyer's novel, and also in part the Royal Shakespeare revival of the Gillette play, Holmes was just a topic everywhere. And so groups sprang up everywhere, and almost all of them were co-ed. So while we didn't have this one honor, we had all the fun that we wanted. You could fill all your days going from group to group, or writing for magazine to magazine. So we had all the Sherlockian fun we needed. So life was as good as it could reasonably be. And of course, while it was kind of understood that while Julian lived, there would be no going co-ed and that only made sense. And we've known that in other smaller groups as well. And Tom Stix was made commissioner, and Tom was a complicated person who was very kind to many people, but he had a kind of a blustery a manner, and so you really didn't know what he was going to say on any particular occasion, but that was fine, and he was working hard for the BSI.
Oh yes,
and that meant for everybody, because the BSI ran these events and the journal and things like that. So he was helping everybody, whether he even knew they existed or not. So then 1991, and the Saturday reception that had started out as a party in Julian Wolfe's house apartment all those years ago, and then gone to the Grolier Club, and now was being held in a hotel, beautiful palm court lobby. That was my favorite place, because it was so old timey.
And it was still a cocktail party at that time.
Yes, indeed. So of course Tom Stix had remarks to make, and he was nervous, but sorry, now it is hard to say, but he said he had special things to do, and that the first thing was to tell us that simultaneously in England, a ceremony was being held by which Dame Jean Conan Doyle was being entered as a full member of the Baker Street Irregulars. Oh. And sensation
I can imagine.
of joy. And then he said if he truly wished that the next person could be with us, because Edith Meiser was a New Yorker par excellence, but her health didn't permit it. And so that he was investing. Edith Meiser, who of course had done the radio series, without which Doubleday might not have hurried into the production of the complete Sherlock Holmes one volume with the Morley introduction, because they knew that the radio series would increase the demand for it, and who did the writing and producing and everything. So a Wonder Woman in every way. And then thirdly, and I might be out of order, one of the people who solved the original Morley Brothers crossword puzzle.
Right.
Whose name I know perfectly well, but now it won't come out for
okay.
me. McMahon, maybe Edith McMahon. So those three women becoming real members was wonderful. And I teared up, I know, because it was more than I expected to see done. And so it was wonderful that he had done that this year. And I thought we would then go about our business. But holy mackerel, then he got choked up and anyway, he called my name. And then he called Susan Rice and Julie Rosenblatt, or Julie Rosenblatt and then Susan Rice, I forget. And that was flabbergasting. That was flabbergasting. Golly, because I had given up expecting it to happen. And when you lose hope, you're free. So it was never on my mind.
Yeah.
But that didn't make it less wonderful.
Wow, what a moment.
And I can say for sure that if I'd had the slightest idea I was going to be invested that day, I would have dressed differently. Wearing a very goofy outfit. But
who cares? Yeah, who cares?
Yes. The Lord made me do that to keep me humble, and that's fine. I looked a fool, but I felt like the queen of the world.
Isn't that wonderful? What a story. Yeah. And then from that moment on, from that year on, it was different.
That's right.
Co-ed.
That's right. And bit by bit, and larger bits by larger bits.
Mm-hmm.
So that was wonderful.
It is wonderful.
I remember sneaking a peek because I was afraid I would have just blank cardboard inside that somehow it would have been a joke, and it would just be blank paper.
That would be a very,
yes.
very bad joke indeed. Wow. Well, Ellen,
and of course the place went mad.
Wow.
Sarah Montague got hold of waiters and explained that they had to find champagne now. And so they did. Magically, champagne appeared.
Wow. That's amazing.
And then we all went back to Mickey and Susan's apartment in the village, which is an apartment about the size of someone's dinner table, dining room table, but dozens of people crowded in.
Yeah, that had to be a good party.
It was wonderful.
Well, Evie, we are out of time. I just really sorry about that.
I know.
I have to have you back because there's like 10 other things I want to talk to you about. So I may invite you back for, another go around at some point here in the near future.
Thank you. You've been very generous.
I just want to say thank you for, I wanted to talk to you about you, and I wanted to talk to you about all of this because it's on one level, it's about Sherlock Holmes. So how serious can it be? But in another way, it really is a big deal. I mean, it is. And for those of us who live in this world, it really matters. And it's just, I just wanted to talk to you about it. So I'm grateful.
Thank you very much.
So we have this, it's just the clock. So thanks and take care. And I will be knocking on your door again, on your inbox, I should say.
Well, that's very kind. You were very good at I talk too much, I sense, but
no. It was
but
wonderful.
I got a lot of the names in that I needed to.
You did a good job. I can't remember people's names at all.
Well, I mean, because there's so many, I can be a bit of the great I am, but honestly, it's all been group activities. That's the only reason for it working, is that so many people.
Isn't that the truth? All right. Well, take care. And I hope to see you in person before too long too. So
yes, indeed. Be well, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And that's it for this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch. Gosh, that was great. And I really regret that we were out of time. I'm sincere. I'm going to probably have to bring Evie back for another talk, because there's so much more on my list of topics I wanted to speak to her about. I also want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you very, very much for your continued support. We're still getting subscribers, and we're still getting followers, and you're still sharing your kind comments with us. And that's very nice and very wonderful. We have 2 episodes left in this season, and you will not want to miss them. I can say that in all honesty. But we are way long, and so I'm just going to have to conclude this by saying thank you, and we'll see you again next time.